Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be here. It is great to see a packed house. To your president, our Putnam County Executive, Mary Ellen Odell, thank you for that introduction and for your great service as president of NYSAC. We're delighted to welcome you all to the Capitol on a balmy January day. Some years it's not quite this nice. My colleague in the world of elected controllers, Mike Connors, the Albany County Comptroller, asked me to mention to everyone, make sure while you're in town, spend money. They need the revenue in Albany County, right? And Elliot Auerbach from Ulster says, those of you driving south, stop at Ulster and spend some money there as well. I want to pick up on one word that your president offered, and that's a word of commendation to your NYSAC executive director and really the entire NYSAC staff team. Steve Aquario is a constant presence in the Capitol. You're here periodically for conferences and gatherings like this, but he's here all the time. And he and his team really do an outstanding job advocating for the interests of New York's counties and county officials day in and day out. They have a wonderful relationship with our office. Even when he could be a bit of a nudge, we welcome his calls and his advocacy. Give Steve and his team another round of applause for everything they do for you. And to all the officers and leaders of NYSAC, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, I know we had hands up, and I know we have many new elected officials. I'm told over 190 new county elected officials. Wow, that's great. It shows county government is still the place to be, and I was very pleased to be greeted earlier by a former colleague of mine from the legislature, former Senator, former Assembly Member George Latimer, now the county exec of Westchester County. So it's great to see, here for Westchester. Congratulations to all of you who are newly elected, those of you who are returning elected. Part of your prize for winning your election is being part of this great organization, being part of NYSAC. And the same goes for those of you who are appointed county officials. I know many of you are there fulfilling your public service as an appointed official. It's so much easier when you get the job without having to run for it, believe me. So it's great that you're here as well. NYSAC is certainly one of the strongest and most effective voices here in the state capitol. And there's no better example of the effectiveness of the organization than this annual legislative conference, consistently one of the most informative and important meetings here in Albany. I certainly have an appreciation for the effort that our local officials put in and day out, the political pressures that you face, competing priorities. Obviously, budget challenges are always an issue for you to face, yet you continue to get the job done for your counties and for your communities. You are on the front lines of our government. You play a critical role, and certainly from the perspective of the Comptroller's office, we want to help you succeed. That's why over the past, believe it or not, 11 years now, for me, we've made it a priority to partner with local governments. We do that through our local government leadership institutes, through our Academy for New York State local officials, through our audits. And, I know sometimes when you hear the Comptroller's office coming to an audit, sometimes you lock the doors a little bit, you're not happy about that, but no, most of you don't. But those audits are really meant to be a helpful tool, a learning tool, if you will, to make government operations as efficient and effective as possible. And then, of course, using modern technology, we put that information out on the web. Many of you subscribe to our weekly emails where we update you on the audits that have been released. That becomes a valuable learning tool, teaching tool, for you to read what's happening in communities across our state so that you could avoid perhaps some of the pitfalls that they fell into, or just as important, learn some of the best practices that are being implemented out there. So we view that audit role as a very important function. The research reports, the technical assistance. We're a phone call away, we're a mouse click away. We are there really to help you. We want to continue to expand our local government training efforts to an even larger audience. That's why we're using technology. Many of you participate in our webinars, our tutorials, and of course we continue to do in-person events. Last year alone, we conducted training sessions for more than 8,400 local officials and staff. And we released 353 audits of local governments, school districts, and public authorities. So, as I said, we take the accountability responsibility seriously. And as you know, Too many instances we find people doing things really wrong, and that leads to other kinds of issues with law enforcement. Fortunately, that's a very small percentage of the audit work that we do, but we understand also that if we could be more effective partners with you, help you do the job in the right way, the way that you want to do it, we prefer to have audits that have no findings at all. So really take us up on that notion of partnership. I'm joined here by some of our team who work on a regular basis with many of you. You should get to know them. Andy Sanfilippo is our Executive Deputy Controller for Local Government and School District Accountability. Wave, Andy. Andy was the elected city controller for the city of Buffalo, so he certainly knows a lot about municipal finance and budgets, and he and his team are available to you. Darrell Obertine, who also served in the state legislature with me, part of our external affairs group. Where's Darrell? Oh, there he is, right there. Those of you from the North Country, we have an in-house North Country advocate in Darrell, so we don't leave the North Country out. One person, two-person applauded. The North Country is here. I also want to point out Yvonne Martinez, who's right there, part of our professional staff on local government and school district accountability. And we have a lot of folks that are out there for you, so feel free to take cards and phone numbers. And I know you have a full day, and feel free to serve and eat, while I'm talking. That's not a problem for me. When you grow up in an Italian-American household, you eat and talk at the same time all the time, so don't be too polite. What I'd like to do, though, is give you an update, and as your president says, a lot going on in the state, obviously a lot going on from Washington that impacts on us, just to give you a sense of the context of the time that we're navigating through, and I hope the information will be helpful to you. So I'll talk a little bit about the state economy, the state budget, and some of the challenges that I know you're dealing with. Certainly when we talk about our state's economy, and I've been able to say this for the past couple of years that I've been with you, we continue to see progress overall in our state of New York. The unemployment rate for December was 4.6%, about half of the 2009 recessionary peak of 8.9%. From the end of the Great Recession in 2009, New York State has added more than 850,000 private sector jobs. Only California, Texas, and Florida have added more jobs, all states with bigger populations. Many more jobs were added than were lost during the depths of the Great Recession. The challenge is that we are obviously a very big state and a state of different regions. And when you drill down on the numbers, what we see is that most of that job recreation has happened in the 5 boroughs of New York City. When you add in Long Island, where I come from, and Westchester, Orange, and Rockland counties, you're really talking about over 90% of those new jobs have been created just in those downstate counties. So that really is the challenge for us. So many of our upstate communities continue to struggle. Many of them are back to where they were before the recession started. But we also see, even in upstate counties where the unemployment rate is down, the reality is the number of jobs are down as well. And people say to me, well, Tom, how can the unemployment rate be so improved and yet you have fewer jobs? Well, people have dropped out of the labor force, out of the labor marketplace. They either stopped looking for work, they've moved downstate, or they've moved out of state. So that really is our continuing challenge. And although we've grown all these private sector jobs, we know the public sector, in the face of budget challenges, we've lost about 70,000 public sector jobs, I'm sure in many of your counties as well, since 2009. Sales tax collections. For you as county officials, probably the most important revenue source and often a less than predictable revenue source. It is a crucial part of the revenue picture for our local governments. We focus on sales tax revenue. Why? It's important to our localities. It's also important to the state. After personal income tax collections, it's the second most important revenue source that we have. Today, perhaps as I'm speaking, we're going to be releasing our local sales tax report. Let me give you some of the highlights that are going to come out today. And this is actually a bit of a silver lining for you at the county level. Local sales tax collections for calendar year 2017 were $16.6 billion, an increase of $620 million, or 3.9% increase from the previous year. This marks the highest year-over-year growth since 2013. The increase was largely driven by growth from the fourth quarter that was at 5.7%, which was 1/3 higher than the growth for the quarter in the prior year. For most regions except New York City, 2017 growth was stronger than the annual average for the prior 6 years. New York City's growth was 4.4%, less than its 2010 through 2016 average. Its $7.4 billion in total collections accounted for 45% of total collections statewide and more than 64% of the collections downstate. Regional variances. Regionally, the strongest 2017 sales tax growth was in the Finger Lakes region, which increased 4.9% from 2016 and outperformed, there's the Finger Lakes right there. It was a good tourism season. Those wineries, everybody's showing up, right? Outperformed every other region in the state. Very, very strong year-over-year growth in the second half of sales tax collections for the year. Other upstate regions that performed well were Central New York, Southern Tier, and the Mohawk Valley, all with annual increases exceeding 4%. A little bit behind, Capital District at 2.8%, so remember what Mike Connors said about shopping here, and Western New York, 3.1%. Downstate, Long Island and Mid-Hudson regions saw their year-over-year collections grow by 3.3%, 3.2% respectively. So I think that's a little bit of a silver lining. It's probably a combination of factors, the economy being better, consumer confidence being better, inflation being up. We saw an increase because of the gasoline prices, motor fuel taxes going up. Different reasons, but certainly for you as county officials, we're seeing very, very strong growth in sales tax collections, better than we've seen for a period of time. So we always have to recognize when we talk about New York, there are many different regions, all with unique characteristics. That is part of why, and some of you have been following this, we are trying to help you understand better what's happening in your own region. In terms of the economic environment, we have started a process of creating economic profiles for all of New York's regions. To date, we've released 4 regional economic profiles for the Mid-Hudson region, Finger Lakes, Central New York, and the North Country. We focus on geography, transportation, demographics, local governments, economy, labor market, major industries, economic activity, and infrastructure. What's happening in the securities industry, Wall Street, whether you love them or hate them, it's a very, very important part of the revenue picture that helps all of us in New York State. We put out our report in the fall on Wall Street, as we do every year. Wall Street had a very good first half of the year, profits over $12 billion, 30% higher than what was raised in the same period in 2016. Somebody likes that. Somebody's got a stock account. After a successful first 6 months, Wall Street profits are on track to exceed last year's level, be the second consecutive year of growth. Keep in mind, for every job created on Wall Street, 2 other jobs are created in the rest of the state's economy. So we keep a close eye on what's happening in Washington. I have great concern about attempts to roll back financial oversight regulation that was put in place after the market collapsed in 08 and 09. With these regulations, we've seen these great profits. So we want to see the marketplace be responsible, avoid excessive risk-taking. So we've been speaking out about concern about not watering down the regulation and the oversights that's there. We don't want to reward high-risk behavior. And keep in mind, those Wall Street profits and the taxes that we receive accounts for about 18% of the total revenue coming to the state. That's why we look at it so carefully. When people ask me how do I feel in terms of threats to our budget situation, the economy, with some regional variances, we still have to do more work upstate. I really think that the question facing us is very much driven by impact of what's happening in Washington. In many ways, we face a triple threat. Projected state budget gaps, because we have seen some fall off in our revenue. Questions about the outlook for personal income tax collections as a consequence of the federal tax reform, and certainly the looming cuts to federal programs that will impact us in New York. Part of my concern, obviously I'm not happy about the cap on the SALT deductions, especially as a downstater. It's really going to be hurtful to many of our families and our communities. But part of how they're going to pay for this tax cut is by cutting federal programs, and that's where it's going to hurt us as well. So it is a very challenging prism that we have to look through right now, with many, many unknowns. And that's the context with which we have to consider the governor's proposals, and specifically the governor's executive budget proposal that's being reviewed right now. I think, as you know, the governor, after the State of the State, releases his budget proposal. We then in the Comptroller's office take a couple of weeks to analyze that proposal. We will put out our analysis and reaction to his proposal. That's not completed yet. But let me just give you a few early comments on where we see the state budget. Our budget picture is especially challenging. We have a projected budget gap that must be addressed of about $4.4 billion. It's the largest since the budget negotiations of 2011. We see out-year budget gaps that are expected to grow. That's a concern as well. As you know, when you've been following our reports for much of 2017, we saw revenues coming in lower than projected, and then projections were lowered. Now, tax receipts in December, we saw a different activity, again in response to what was happening in Washington with the federal tax reform. Tax receipts in December were actually above projections, but it's unclear exactly what the revenue picture will be in the weeks and months ahead and in the aftermath of those federal tax changes. We think it's a timing question, that people were holding back, doing certain transactions when they saw what was happening with the federal changes. They rushed to do that in December. We expect it to even out through the rest of this fiscal year and going into next year. But there's no doubt that we have a heightened concern about the uncertainty in projecting our revenue picture. In terms of local governments, in terms of how you will be impacted by this budget proposal, the proposed budget appropriates $225 million to match demonstrated shared services savings that realized by the 34 counties and participating local governments that submitted a countywide shared services plan last year. As you know, when this initiative was unveiled, many of you rose to the occasion and you did the hard work to respond. The governor's budget also provides continued funding for important grant programs through the Department of State, $35 million for the Citizens Reorganization Empowerment Grants, $4 million for the Local Government Efficiency Grant Program, $75.8 million to fund municipal grants and loans by the Financial Restructuring Board for Local Governments. Funding for CHIPS and Marcaselli, very important for our transportation programs, remains flat. There are also some changes that would make it easier for sharing of services to take place with regard to zoning and planning. I know many of you continue to raise concern about the raise the age change that was implemented. Obviously, that's an area where your advocacy continues to be important. And obviously, keep in mind the time of year. The budget has been proposed. There are going to be very detailed negotiations now between the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor. All of you, I know, maintain good relations with your senators and your assembly members back home and here in Albany. This is the time of year, obviously, in a united voice through NYSAC, but with your own efforts as well, to let your legislators know how you feel about the governor's proposals, what you'd like to see change, what kind of a difference you'd like to see. I expect that every effort, even with the uncertainty, will be made to get the budget done by April 1st. So we're practically in February. Now is the time where your advocacy is going to matter. Well, in terms of Washington, there's still a great concern not only about our current budget, but as we move forward. And as I said earlier, we face real risk of reductions in federal aid, particularly with regard to federal health care funding. These include cuts to the disproportionate share hospitals that serve a large number of our uninsured individuals and people covered by Medicaid, elimination of cost-sharing reduction payments on the Affordable Care Act, and loss of enhanced standing for community health care centers throughout our state. They have their own budget deliberations going on in Washington, and obviously it's very unclear how all of that will settle out. But there's no doubt that it's just a question of, in my mind, how big of a cut will we face in these areas. So it's very clear that we have to look at the federal tax changes as well. That $10,000 cap on New Yorkers' federal deductions for state and local taxes flows into our state's tax law as a $10,000 cap on state deductions for property taxes. This could affect the tax liability for many New Yorkers. Same with the federal child care tax credit. So this also will have to be part of the budget negotiations here in Albany and has great implications. To deal with the possibility of significant federal budget cuts, the budget proposal again includes a provision that if we lose more than $850 million, the state budget director will have to come up with a plan as to how we would absorb those cuts perhaps including cuts to local assistance. So again, it's incumbent upon all of us to closely monitor what's going on in Washington, not only to talk to your state legislators about possible impacts, but your federal representatives as well. Have them understand decisions being made in Washington could affect New York State, could trickle down and affect state aid and state support to your county and your local government programs as well. I always like to point out that our concern about what's happening in Washington is in the context of a trend that has been troubling already. You know, a couple of years ago, we updated a version. Remember Senator Moynihan always did the report, how much money we send to Washington versus how much we got back? Well, we've updated that report, and we're doing it now. We put out a report last year. We found that for every dollar that New York sends to Washington, we get back 84 cents. When we did that report in 2015 numbers, we were getting back 91 cents for every dollar. So the trend is already going in the wrong direction. The average, the national average for states, for every dollar they send to Washington, they get $1.18 back. So we're a net giver to Washington already, and that's before any of the changes of the current administration. So we have a lot to be concerned about. Well, we've been working very hard at the state level to keep our fiscal house in order, and as you know, at the local level, you're doing the same thing, often with great challenges for counties, for local governments, for school districts, and that's why the decisions being made in Washington and Albany have such an important impact on you. Many of you, over a period of years in this post-recessionary time, have been dealing with too many challenges: flat or decreased state and federal aid. Some of you have seen a loss in property value that hasn't been regained since the Great Recession hit, population loss for too many of our communities, and budgeting in the context of the property tax cap and the property tax freeze. As you know, the property tax levy growth for local governments is capped at 1.84% for 2018. Now, this does represent an increase in the growth factor from the 0.68% for the previous fiscal year, but it is the fifth year in a row that's less than 2% for local governments operating on a calendar fiscal year. Well, because of this combination of challenges and you're having to deal with the tax cap, we have stepped up our efforts to help you with compliance with these requirements. Last year, we conducted 508 property tax reviews to help local governments comply with the tax cap. We certainly recognize the importance of property taxes as a more predictable revenue source than the sales tax revenue. And we also know that a critical challenge that many of you are facing right now is the impact of property tax exemptions. It has a tremendous impact on local tax base. This is another area where we've done some analysis in the past. We're working on a more detailed report that we're going to be putting out very soon, looking at property tax exemptions across the state. Let me give you a quick preview on some of our preliminary findings. In 2016, property tax exemptions totaled $457 billion, or about 30% of the $1.5 trillion in total property value outside of New York City. 2.7 million, or 58.3% of all properties, were eligible for some type of tax exemption in 2016, with the STAR program, no surprise, alone accounting for 2.4 million partial exemptions. Whether you have tax-exempt properties due to government, not-for-profit land, or buildings, or any other of the many types of property tax exemptions, it obviously comes with many challenges. In terms of mandatory government exemptions, some municipalities have had success in working to develop or update voluntary agreements to help provide some financial relief. For residential and business exemptions, tax assessors must be diligent to ensure that exemptions are only provided when warranted and that they are properly documented. My auditors have also been looking at property tax exemptions and how the assessments are being managed. And we're working with the New York State Assessors Association to develop some training and some improvement on best practices. So stay tuned on that front as well. As you know, we continue to try to assist local governments that are facing budget issues with our fiscal stress monitoring system. We have never had a municipal bankruptcy in New York State. We don't want to see a Detroit happen here. Since we began our program in 2013, we reviewed over 2,000 localities annually. And I'm very proud to say that our early warning system, that's really what it is, has been recognized as a national role model of how to avoid budget collapse for a community. In our 4-year review of the program that we released in September, we found that from 2013 through 2016, 117 local governments, about 7%, have been in one of the 3 fiscal stress categories for at least 1 year. So when you think about all of our local governments, the fact that over that 4-year period, only 7% were ever in a level of stress at any point, I think that's encouraging. In 2016, a total of 38 calendar year-based local governments were in stress. That was down from the number of 58 in 2015. 11 municipalities were in stress for all 4 years. We put out our 5-year review of school district scores last week. Again, we see improvement in the school district numbers as well. Fiscal stress monitoring is not about trying to shine a negative spotlight, trying to say we gotcha. It really is about making sure that you as local officials know what's happening in your own community. We want your taxpayers and your residents to know what's going on as well. When we see a local government facing some level of stress, it provides the opportunity for us to step up our support for you. Budget reviews, audits, technical assistance, help you with multi-year financial planning strategies. Call on us if you need assistance, if you see that you have some budget issues. Another area we continue to focus on is the accountability of state dollars and preschool special education providers. Steve Aquario, you're the one who brought that to me a long time ago. We continue our audits in this area. We found too many instances where expenses submitted to state education, expenses that you are partially responsible for, and we've identified many problems with those expenses. Mismanagement, blatant misuse, and outright misappropriation by providers of funds, public funds intended to serve children with special needs. Thanks to NYSAC's advocacy, we had legislation enacted that requires all of these programs to be audited. We received additional money to hire auditors to do the work. And I want you to know, Steve, we're up to now 108 audits of these programs. We have more audits underway. We've identified $65 million in recovery of taxpayer money. And unfortunately, we have had multiple instances of criminal convictions, court-ordered restitution of close to $18 million in public funds that literally were stolen. We have another 15 audits underway right now, and you have my commitment. We're going to audit all those programs and make sure that money is not being wasted, county money and state money. Now, of course, when I came in, I got a few questions right away on our pension fund. I know 1 or 2 of you care about that, as people who have to pay the bills we send out, and as members of the system as well. Well, you know the reports that are out there by outside validators. You don't need me to say it, but I'm always very proud to be able to say it. New York continues to have one of the best funded and strongest state public pension plans in the country. As of December 31st, our estimated value was over $200 billion for the first time. We are really moving in a very strong direction. Obviously, we're benefiting from the strength of the markets, but we're benefiting from our long-term strategy as well. Unlike other state pension funds that you read about, Illinois, Jersey, Pennsylvania, facing real difficulties because of short-sighted decisions made in the past, we don't have that challenge. One reason why Moody's, Fitch, and Standard & Poor's upgraded our state's bond rating a couple of years ago was because of the strength of our pension fund. The Pew Research Center ranked public pension funds in 2017 out of 50 states. How well funded were we? We came in number 3 out of the 50 states, over 95% funded. So it's virtually fully funded. It's important for you because under the new accounting rules, any unfunded state pension liability you have to carry on your books, right? And so that could hurt you when you do your borrowing. So the fact that we are so well funded, it's not an issue here in New York State. We've been able to decrease the employers' retirement system employer contribution rate over the past 5 years. Police and fire, 4 out of the past 5 years we had a decrease. I don't know yet what the rates are going to be that we'll announce around Labor Day. We still have 1 more quarter to go. We've got through March 31st. So as I always say, as it gets to the end of March, I need you to light a candle, say a prayer, go to synagogue or temple, whatever you do, and keep me in your prayers that we have a good March 31st. But, we're going to do what we can to lower the rates whenever we can. But I need you to keep in mind our obligation to keep our fund well funded, our obligation to you as our employer partners, and our obligation to you as members of the system and your employees is that we keep the fund well funded. That's our overriding concern. So even if we have another good year in terms of the markets and we get a good return, keep in mind, because we're so well funded, we have plenty of money in the pension fund for people who are retired already or people who are working now and are going to retire in the near future. It's for the man or woman who you are hiring today that are going to be working in your county, that's going to be retiring 25, 30 years from now. Those are the people we are thinking about. And that's what's reflected when our actuary does the rates and the calculation. But we're continuing to have confidence in how we manage our pension fund. We're looking, as always, for more opportunities to invest within New York State, with our small business lending program, with our in-state private equity investment program. Keep those programs in mind as well if you have businesses that you're trying to attract to your county. So our economy continues to be moving statewide in the right direction. We'd like to see a little more effort to jumpstart the economy in the parts of upstate that have still been lagging. These certainly remain challenging times for all of us, and you are on the front lines of government, making decisions, delivering services. And as I said earlier, that's why, from my point of view, whatever we can do to work with you, to make your job as easy as possible, I do hope you'll consider us a resource as you discharge your respective responsibilities. We have a lot of tools to help you succeed, and we do want to see you succeed. As I said earlier, watch what's happening in Washington, watch what's happening in Albany, and don't be shy about engaging with your federal and state representatives so they understand the implications of their decisions on your budget and your financial picture. So we can't make all these challenges disappear or go away. I wish we could, but it certainly means we should look for more opportunities to partner, for us to work together. Again, consider us a resource in each and every way. Thank you so much for supporting NYSAC, and we're here to help. Give us a call. Thank you very, very much.